Welcome to the object class methods. In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at what the object class is, and then some of its methods, such as the toString method and the equals method. And then, to finish off, we'll be comparing the equals method with the equals operator. So let's start off by understanding what the object class is. So the object class is known as the universal superclass. So it has a direct or indirect relationship with every other class in Java. So we're going to be understanding what a superclass is and what these different relationships between classes are a little bit later in the course. But for now, that's sufficient knowledge. And it's part of the java.lang package. And this java.lang package contains so many classes that are so essential to Java that this class is actually automatically imported, so we don't need to have an import statement every time we use the object class or any other class in the java.lang package. And the object class contains many useful methods that are very important and essential when you're using objects. As you can tell, it's the object class, so as we work with objects, which we often do in Java, it's important to and understand the methods of the objects class because they can be applied to many programs using objects. So let's start off by taking a look at our first method of the object class, and that is the toString method. So what the toString method does is it basically converts an object into a string, so to speak. And what it does is that when you are printing an object, the toString method is automatically invoked. So whenever you're printing something out, no matter what, whether you like it or not, whenever you're printing out an object, whether you like it or not, the toString method is automatically run. And the result is not something that's readable, it's at, and then those dashes represent some numbers that come up. And this is all part of the memory allocation, memory location of the object, and that's something that's complicated and not very useful for the user. It's weird and unreadable, so that's why we take a look at the toString method more in depth to see how we can modify it so that it's more useful for us. So here we have an example of the regular output a toString method would give. So first we start off with an object reference by defining a variable alg2, and we're going to say, as we've been looking at the course program, course alg2 equals new course algebra 2. So this is basically instantiating a object of the course class with a private instance variable name set to a value of algebra 2. Next, we're going to go System.out.println alg2. Now when the computer reads that, it automatically invokes the toString method, which converts this object, this alg2 object, a course object, into a string, and then the output comes out to be course at, and then the dashes represent different alphanumerical numbers and alphabets that are basically defining the memory location of this variable. And that's something that's not very useful for the user. That's not something they can really interpret, and that's why we need to do something that is called override it. So when you override something, so the toString method is built in as default and it's invoked as default, so it's automatically invoked without our control. But one thing we can do to solve this problem is when it is run, we can change what happens within it. So even though it's built in and default, we're going to be overriding the toString method in order to get the desired result. So what we could do is we could go public string toString parentheses. So what's this? We're going to be placing this in the course class, not the object itself. So in the course class, and what this is doing is that the public string toString parentheses is the exact declaration of the default toString method. Now we're going to repeat that declaration, and keep in mind that the toString method in its default form is not shown in the code, it's just built in, so you don't even need to write code for it. But when you want to override it and replace it with your own code, you go public string toString parentheses, so that's the exact declaration toString default method, and when the computer sees this, the computer understands that you want to override the default method and you want to add your own code. So the computer understands that, and then next time that it runs the toString method, it will be running your code, not the default code. And let's take a look at the body, so we'll see what we're overriding the toString or default toString method with. And we're simply saying return, in quotations, course name is plus name. The semicolon should not be there, but the important thing to understand is that we're basically saying that the string that it returns, because based on the string keyword, you know that this method has to return a string. So it's returning the string course name is space, and then whatever the private instance variable name, which will represent a value or a string that is the course name. And next time when we say course ALG2 equals new course Algebra 2, after we define that, when we print out System.out.println ALG2, what it does is it automatically invokes the toString method, which returns course name is Algebra 2. That string is then returned, and that is what is printed out. So as you can see, the output will come out to be course name is Algebra 2. Okay, so next let's take a look at the equals method. The equals method is used to compare objects, and it returns true or false. So we've been looking at all these different operators, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and they also return true or false, but they've been used to compare the primitive types. The equals method is used to compare objects. And the way that this method returns to be true, which means two objects are equivalent to each other, is they need to have the same memory allocation. So let's say we have two objects. Let's say we have an object Algebra 2 and we have an object Geometry. So we need to explicitly say Algebra 2 is equal to Geometry. Algebra 2 is equal to Geometry, and then when they have the same memory allocation because they're defined to be equivalent to each other, that's only when the equals method returns true. If we were to, let's say hypothetically, declare, let's go back one slide. So as you can see, when we declare course Algebra 2 equals new course Algebra 2, and let's say after that, right, the next line we did course Geometry equals new course Algebra 2. So everything is same except the variable name. If we were to compare Algebra 2 and Geometry and check if they were equal to each other using the equals method, we would get false, because the equals method does not check for the same contents. It checks for the same memory allocation. And if you want to check for the same contents, you'll have to override this method. And that's something we're not going to be doing right now because it gets a little bit complicated there. Alright, so now let's take a look at the equals method when compared to the equals operator. So the equals method is, as we've learned, used for objects, while the equals operator, which we went over earlier in the course, is actually used for primitive types like integer, double, and to compare those types. So it's important not to get those two mixed up. That's a very common mistake that programmers make. And in addition, it's important to remember that you use the equals method with strings, and strings are not primitive types. So you would not use the equals operator, and strings are objects, so that's why you use the equals method. And overall in this lecture, we understood what the object class is, and then we took a look at the toString method and the equals method, which we're going to be applying with some hands-on programs later in the course.